Okay, this video is going to work through the solutions to homework 2. Homework 2 is the one where we're going through the process of calculating the measures of disease frequency. We were using this example. We had a prospective cohort study conducted to determine the frequency of relapse among people being treated for opiate addiction in Vermont. Over the course of a 12-month period beginning in June 2012, the study enrolled 20 people being treated for opiate addiction in Vermont and followed them for up to 24 months. The subjects were tested at the time of enrollment in the study, prior to being followed up. Each subject was contacted and retested at the beginning of each month. The table below summarizes the findings in the 20 subjects. An X indicates when a subject was found to be using opiates, and a question mark indicates when a subject became lost to follow-up. The dashed lines indicate continued follow-up. And there's a note here that 4 out of the 20 people were found to be using opiates at the times of enrollment. These are subjects 1, 10, 14, and 18. So we can see right away when they were enrolled in June, this person was already using opiates. Person number 10 was enrolled in October and found to be using opiates at the start, and so there were no follow-up. So first thing we're going to do is for each subject we want to complete this column at the right and figure out how many person months they were at risk of relapse during the study. Now remember that in order to be at risk for relapse, someone needs to be free of using opiates at the start. So for subject 1, since they were using opiates and there was no time when they weren't at risk for relapse because they had essentially already relapsed. So subject 1 has no person months at risk, and this will be true for subjects 10, 14, and 18 also. These subjects are not at risk during their follow-up because they were found to be already using opiates. Boy, it's hard to go across. Let's see. Got a 0 here. I've got a 0 here. And I've got a 0 here. Okay, so all of those had no time at risk because they had already had the event. So for subject 2, we started following them in June. We can see June, July, August, September, October. They were at risk all of those months. So there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months at risk. On the 6th month, at the beginning of that month, they were found to have relapsed. So they were no longer at risk for relapse because they had already relapsed. So we've got 5 person months at risk for subject 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So months at risk for subject 3. Then they're lost to follow-up. We don't know if they relapsed or not, but we don't know if they were at risk or if they actually had their relapse, so we just count the number of months that we watched them. And we repeat this process. Subject 4 had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 months at risk and never relapsed. All right, and so we're going to continue down and just count the dashes across, and that's how we figure out the person time at risk. So we've got 23, 7 months at risk, 22 months at risk, 2 months at risk, 12 months at risk, 14 months at risk, 0. Then we've got 4 months at risk, 19 months at risk, 1 month at risk, 4 months at risk, 11 months at risk, 6 months at risk, 9 months at risk, and 13 months at risk. So if I want to figure out the total amount of person time that I followed people while they were at risk, I add up all the numbers in this column, and I get a total of 162 person months at risk. So that's the first thing we needed to figure out. Question 2 asks us to calculate the incidence density for relapse among those enrolled in the study for the study period. So incidence density is the number of events that we observed, and this is new events because incidence only is interested in new events, so new relapses, divided by the person time at risk. So in this situation, if I look at new occurrences, now this is not a new occurrence. This is one that happened at the time of enrollment, so we don't count this one. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 new relapses during the study period out of the 162 months at risk. Gives us an incidence density of 0.049 or 4.9 relapses per 100 person months at risk. So that gives us an idea of the rate of relapse. Question 3 asks us to find the cumulative incidence among those enrolled in the study for the study period. So cumulative incidence is the number of new events divided by the number of people at risk. Now remember, although we had 20 subjects, 4 of them had already relapsed before the study started, so they were never at risk. So we have 20 minus 4 people at risk, and we have 8 new events that occurred. So 8 out of 16 gives us a cumulative incidence of 0.5 or 5 relapses per 10 people at risk. Question 4 wants us to calculate the incidence odds. Incidence odds are the number of new events divided by the number at risk without events. So in this case, remember, we had 8 new events. We had 16 people at risk, but 8 of those are the ones who had events. So that gives us 8 over 8, or 1, as our incidence odds. So people were equally likely to relapse or not relapse during the study period. Question 5 asks us to calculate a confidence interval. We'll do a 95% confidence interval for the incidence density. To make our 95% confidence interval, we use our estimate for the incidence density plus or minus 1.96 times the square root of x over t squared, where x is the number of events and t is the total person time at risk. So our incidence density was 0.049. We add and subtract 1.96 times the square root of the number of events that were observed was 8 divided by the total person time at risk was 162 squared. I put that all into my calculator. I've got 0.049 minus 1.96 times the square root of 8 divided by 162 squared. Gives me a lower limit of 0.0148 and an upper limit of 0.0832. When I want to interpret that confidence interval, which is question 6, remember my confidence interval is something that I'm 95% confident that the true value of the parameter that I'm estimating, so that the true incidence density in the population is between 0.0148 and 0.0832, or 148 1.48 and 8.32 relapses per 100 person months at risk. So that's sort of the generic interpretation of our confidence interval, but what exactly is the population that this is representing? If we look back at the explanation, we're trying to determine the frequency of relapse among people being treated for opiate addiction in Vermont. So maybe something along the lines of the true incidence density of relapse among people being treated for opiate addiction in Vermont is between 1.48 and 8.32 relapses per 100 person months at risk. Taking it from the generic statement to something a little bit more specific to the context that we're working in. The last part of the homework focused on calculating prevalence instead of incidence. We're told that HPV is the most common sexually transmitted disease in the United States. The Centers for Disease Control estimated that at the start of 2008, the number of new and existing infections of HPV was 79,100,000. They also estimate that the number of new HPV infections during the year 2008 was 14,100,000. And we know that the total population of the United States in 2008 was approximately 304,100,000 people. So we're going to start by calculating the point prevalence at the start of 2008. Now, point prevalence is the number of new and existing cases at the defined time point divided by the population at that same time point. So at the start of 2008, we're told the number of new and existing HPV infections was 79,100,000. We're also told that the population was 304,100,000, which gives us a point prevalence of 0.2601, or 260.1 cases of HPV infection per 1,000 people. Question 8 asks us to calculate the period prevalence of HPV during the year 2008. Now, period prevalence is different from point prevalence because point prevalence is like if I take a quick peek right at this exact moment at the start of 2008, what proportion of the population has HPV infection at this time. Right? Period prevalence says if I look over the entire year, what proportion of the population experienced HPV infection, new or existing, at some point during that year. So we need to know the number of new and existing cases at the start of the year, plus the number of new during the year, and divide that by the total population. So we know that at the beginning of the year there were 79,100,000 existing cases of HPV. During the year, there were 14,100,000 new cases of HPV infection. And we divide that by the total size of the population, 304,100,000. This gives us a period prevalence of 0.3065, or 306.5 cases of HPV infection per 1,000 people. During the year 2008. And then the very last question, question 9, asks about what additional information would be needed to calculate the point prevalence at the start of 2009. Now, we talked a bit before about the fact that there are many things that influence prevalence. Okay. Prevalence at any point in time is affected by how many existing cases there are, how much incidence there is, how many new cases there are coming in, but also how many deaths occur among people with HPV, how many people might be cured, or in the case of HPV, not so much cured by treatment, but just sort of the disease runs its course and people recover. So a couple of things we need to know. Also, remember, prevalence is affected by the size of the population. So population leaving or coming in affects prevalence. So a couple things that we need to know in order to figure out the point prevalence at the beginning of 2009. We'd need to know how many people were cured or recovered, how many deaths occurred among people who had HPV during 2008, and we'd need to know what the population size is at the beginning of 2009 in order to figure out what the point prevalence is at that point. All right. Hopefully this helped you sort through any issues you had with that homework assignment. If you find that you've still got some questions, please let me know. Thanks. Have a good day.